She said it the way you'd mentioned the weather turning cold, casual, almost kind. Dad, we think it might be easier if you stayed home this year. I was standing in my own kitchen, the same kitchen I'd built an addition onto 32 years ago, when my daughter was born and we needed the space. The tile under my feet was the same tile her mother and I had picked out together at a store that no longer exists. I had a dish towel in my hand. I don't know why I remember that. Maybe because I held onto it tighter than I needed to. Easier, I said. For who? My daughter. She's 41 now, has her father's eyes and her mother's way of ending conversations before they start. Looked at her husband across the kitchen island. One of those looks that says we talked about this already. Her husband, the one I'd helped move into their first apartment, the one I'd co-signed a loan for when the bank turned him down, gave me a small nod. Supportive, but not of me. Grandma finds the drive tiring, my daughter said. And last time, things got tense. Last time. I've turned that phrase over in my mind more times than I can count. Last Thanksgiving, I had asked, once plainly, without raising my voice, why my name had been removed from the emergency contact list at my wife's memory care facility. My wife of 38 years, my name gone, replaced with my daughter's and my son-in-law's. I'd asked the facility coordinator about it during a routine visit, and she'd looked at me with careful eyes and said the family had requested the change. The family. I am the family. But I'd asked about it at dinner, and the table had gone quiet in that way tables do when everyone already knows something you don't. I'll be there for Christmas, I said. It wasn't a question. My daughter set her coffee mug down. We just think, given everything, maybe a smaller gathering would be better for Mom. I looked at her for a moment. The dish towel was still in my hand. I folded it slowly and set it on the counter. Your mother doesn't always know what month it is, I said. She's not going to notice who's at the table. The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. I drove home. I'm renting a small place now, a one-bedroom near the lake, since the house sold 18 months ago, and I sat in my car for a while after I pulled into the lot. The engine ticked as it cooled. I'm 67 years old. I spent 34 years in commercial insurance, the last 12 as a senior underwriter. I know how to read a document. I know what risk looks like before it becomes a loss. I know the difference between an oversight and a decision. What had just happened was not an oversight. I went inside. I made myself a glass of water and stood by the window looking out at the lake. The geese were still there, 2 of them, the same pair that showed up every fall. My wife always liked the geese. She used to bring bread on Sundays even though the sign said not to. I was thinking about her, about the version of her I could still reach, on her better days when she'd squeeze my hand and say my name right, when my phone buzzed on the counter. An alert from my bank. A notification I'd set up years ago, one of those habits you develop when you spent your career reading the fine print. Any transaction over $200 on the joint account I hadn't fully closed yet, the one tied to a recurring medical payment, would send me a notice. The charge was for $412, Merchant Alderton and Briggs Family Law Group. I didn't recognize it. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. Alderton and Briggs. I searched the name. Baton Rouge firm, established 2009, specializing in estate planning and guardianship proceedings. 3 attorneys listed. One of them had my son-in-law's last name, his cousin, I'd learn later. His cousin, whose name I had never heard mentioned once in 7 years of family dinners. I sat there for a long time. Outside, the geese were still moving along the bank, unhurried, like they had nowhere urgent to be. I thought about the emergency contact change. I thought about being asked not to come to Christmas. I thought about the conversation my daughter and I'd had 8 months ago, when she'd said gently but firmly that maybe I didn't need to be so involved in her mother's care decisions, that the facility staff found it complicated when 2 parties were giving conflicting input. I had never given conflicting input. I had never called the facility more than twice a week. I had never raised my voice to a single nurse or coordinator. But I had asked questions. I had read the care agreement line by line. I had noticed when a charge appeared on the bill for a service that hadn't been provided. I had pointed that out. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. The next morning, I called the bank when they opened. The representative was polite, professional, careful. I asked about the charge. She told me the account had been accessed online 2 days prior. A new payee had been added. She read me the name of the payee and I recognized it immediately. Alderton and Briggs Family Law Group. Who authorized the addition of that payee? I asked. There was a pause. The account shows dual authorization on file, sir. Either party may add payees. The account still had my daughter listed as a cosigner. We'd added her 4 years ago for convenience, during a brief period when my wife's symptoms first began, and I'd had a minor surgery and needed backup. 4 years ago, when I still trusted that convenience would only ever be used for what it was intended. I hung up and sat at the table for a long time. I didn't feel angry. I felt something quieter and heavier than anger. The feeling you get when you've been looking at something your whole life and suddenly understand you'd been seeing it wrong. I spent the morning making calls. My own attorney, a man I'd used for estate matters years back, answered on the second ring. I explained what I'd found. He was quiet for a moment, then told me to come in the following morning and to bring every document I had related to my wife's care, the account activity, and any correspondence about the emergency contact change. I asked him plainly what guardianship proceedings were. He explained. He said in some cases a family member, a child, typically, could petition the court to be named legal guardian of an incapacitated adult. That once granted, guardianship gave the petitioner authority over medical decisions, financial decisions, and living arrangements. That in those proceedings a spouse was not automatically protected, that it depended on the state, the judge, and the documentation. I asked him if that meant my daughter could legally make decisions about my wife's care without my input. He said potentially yes. I thanked him and ended the call. I sat there long enough that the light in the room changed. My daughter called that afternoon. I let it ring. Then she called again, and I answered. Dad, she said, I just saw the bank notification. She'd set one up too, apparently. The same kind I had. Then you know I saw the charge, I said. She was quiet for a moment. It's not what you're thinking. What am I thinking? I asked. That we're trying to cut you out. Her voice had that particular tone she'd used since she was 16, the one that made disagreement sound like ingratitude. We're trying to protect Mom. From what? I said. She didn't answer right away. You get upset, she said finally. At the facility, you ask too many questions. The staff feels like they're being audited. I caught a billing error, I said. $340 for a physical therapy session that didn't happen. I would think the staff would prefer that to the alternative. Dad, who is the cousin? I said. The silence on the line was different from the kitchen silence. Thinner, more careful. What cousin? Alderton and Briggs, I said. Your husband's cousin is listed as an associate. I looked him up this morning. I could hear her breathing. Then, faintly, her husband's voice in the background. Not the words, just the sound of him speaking. It's just preliminary, my daughter said. We haven't filed anything. You paid $412 to a guardianship attorney, I said, using an account I'm on, for a preliminary conversation you didn't mention to me. We were going to talk to you. When? I said. She didn't answer. After Christmas, I said, after the forms were already filed. Her husband said something else in the background, and she said quietly, I know. And in that small exchange, I understood exactly what I was dealing with. She wasn't acting alone. She hadn't thought this up at her kitchen island one afternoon. This had been a plan, with steps, and I had been scheduled to find out about it at whatever point was most convenient for the plan. I'll be talking to my attorney tomorrow, I said, and I'm removing myself from the joint account today. Dad, please don't do that. It's tied to Mom's care payment. Then it can be rerouted, I said, to an account that isn't accessible to anyone but me. Anything related to your mother's care, I'll fund directly. She started to cry, not theatrically. She's not that kind of crier. Small, controlled, the kind that usually made me want to fix something. I let it sit there. I just wanted things to be easier, she said. I know, I replied. And easier for you means I'm not in the room. I ended the call. I drove to the bank that afternoon and completed the separation of the joint account. The teller, A young woman with very careful handwriting walked me through every step. I thanked her and drove to the credit union, but I'd kept a personal savings account since 1987, the kind of account you forget you have until you need it. I updated everything. Direct payments to the memory care facility scheduled through my account only, with confirmation notices sent to my email in my attorney's office. When I got home, there was a voicemail from my son-in-law. I hadn't heard his voice directed at me in months. He said my name, then said that my daughter was upset, that this wasn't how things were supposed to go, that they'd always planned to include me in the conversation. He said the word family 4 times. I counted. I didn't call back. The following morning, I sat across from my attorney in an office that smelled like old carpet and fresh coffee, which I've always found oddly comforting. He had 3 documents spread out on the desk. He walked me through each one carefully. The first was a letter I could send to the memory care facility, formally asserting my rights as my wife's legal spouse, requesting written confirmation that my name be reinstated as primary emergency contact, and notifying the facility that any changes to that designation would require my written consent. The second was a letter to Alderton and Briggs notifying them that any guardianship petition involving my wife would be contested and that I was represented by counsel. The third was a request for a complete accounting of any funds accessed from the joint account in the past 18 months. I signed all 3. Before I left, my attorney said something I've thought about since. He said, "The thing about guardianship cases is that judges look very hard at who shows up, not who says the right things, who has been present, who has the records." I had 38 years of presence. I had the records. My daughter called twice that week. My son-in-law called once. I didn't answer any of them, not as punishment, as clarity. I needed to understand what had been set in motion before I could have a conversation that meant anything. On a Thursday morning, I drove to the facility. My wife was having a good day. She knew my name. She held my hand and told me she was cold, and I got her an extra blanket from the nurse's station. We watched the weather on the small TV in her room for 20 minutes. And at one point she laughed at something the meteorologist said, and I felt the way I always feel in those moments, grateful and heartbroken in the exact same breath. Before I left, I stopped at the front desk and introduced myself to the facility director. I gave her a copy of my attorney's letter. She read it standing there at the desk, her expression careful and professional, and then she looked up at me and said, "Mr. Pufflemy, Webb, I want you to know your wife asks for you. She says your name. That matters to us." I nodded. I managed to get to the parking lot before I had to stop and just stand there for a minute with my hand on the roof of my car. The following Saturday, I received a certified letter, Alderton and Briggs, on behalf of my daughter and son-in-law, acknowledging receipt of my attorney's notice. The letter stated that their clients were reassessing their approach and wished to explore a collaborative arrangement rather than a formal petition. Collaborative, the word they use when the other options stopped being viable. My attorney called me that afternoon. He said the facility had also sent a written response confirming that my emergency contact status was being reinstated. He said the accounting request had come back clean, no other unusual withdrawals, and that the one charge I'd found appeared to be the only one. "They tested it," he said. "They tried one move, you responded immediately, and they understood what they were dealing with." I asked him what he thought they actually wanted. He was quiet for a moment. "Control," he said, "of the process, of the timeline, of what happens next. Sometimes it's about money. Sometimes it's about wanting to feel like they're in charge of something." He paused. "But they didn't expect you to be watching." "I've been watching for 34 years. It's what underwriters do." 2 weeks later, my daughter came to see me. She called first, asked if she could come, and I said yes. She arrived in the late afternoon when the light off the lake goes flat and golden. She sat at my kitchen table, the small one, the one I'd bought secondhand when I moved into this place, and she wrapped her hands around a cup of tea she didn't drink. She said she was sorry. She said it plainly without conditions attached. That surprised me. I listened. She said her husband had pushed for it, that he'd found the cousin, made the call, told her it was just a consultation, that she had known on some level that it had grown beyond that, and that she had let herself not look too closely. I believed her, and I also knew that believing her didn't change what she had chosen. You removed me from the contact list, I said. That happened before any of this. That was the first thing. She looked down. Dev said it would simplify things, that the facility preferred one main contact. Did you check whether that was true? I asked. She shook her head. I let that sit there between us. Your mother asks for me, I said. The director told me. My daughter's face crumpled for just a second. Then she composed herself. She is, despite everything, her father's daughter. I know, she said. Then whatever arrangement we make going forward, I said, starts there, with that fact. She nodded. She agreed to a family meeting, her husband, my attorney, and a mediator my attorney had recommended. No cousins, no quiet consultations. On the record. Transparent. After she left, I washed the 2 cups and stood at the kitchen window watching the lake go dark. The geese had settled for the evening, 2 shapes resting near the bank. Still, unbothered. I thought about my wife, about 38 years of ordinary Sundays, of arguments about the thermostat, of the way she used to read aloud from catalogues she had no intention of ordering from, but the bread for the geese and the signs that said not to, and how she'd say they can't arrest you for kindness. I thought about how she would have handled this if she'd been able to. She would have been furious, quiet about it, furious. I understood that now. Quiet wasn't the same as accepting. It never had been. My name was back on the list. My account was protected. My wife still knew my name on the days that mattered. Everything else, the meetings, the mediators, the slow work of deciding what trust looks like now, that was still ahead of me. I wasn't under any illusion that one certified letter had resolved 38 years of a family learning who it really was. But I was no longer standing outside looking in. A week after she'd asked me to stay home for Christmas, my daughter had called me in a panic. And for the first time since that afternoon in my own kitchen, with a dish towel in my hand and nowhere to put it, I understood exactly why. I had been quiet for too long. I had smoothed things over until the surface looked fine, and the structure underneath had shifted without me noticing. That was on me, partly. The kind of error you only recognize once you've stopped making it. I still go to see my wife on Thursdays and Sundays. She still asks me to fix the blanket the way I do it, tucked in on the left side first. I still bring her water in the blue cup she likes, not the white ones they leave on the tray. These things matter to her. They matter to me. No petition, no cousin in a law firm 2 states over changes that. If you've ever watched someone quietly redraw the lines around you, not all at once, but a small adjustment here, a reassurance there, until one day you're standing outside a room you used to belong to. I don't need to tell you what it feels like. You already know. What I'd tell you is this: the paperwork matters. The account alerts matter. The letters, the attorneys, the documented phone calls. All of it matters. Not because it's how you win, but because it's how you remain legible, present, real in the ways that count when it comes to a decision about someone you love. I'm 67 years old. I'd been quiet in the ways that cost me. I won't make the same mistake twice. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the bank alert, not the certified letter, not even the afternoon I stood in the facility parking lot with my hand on the roof of my car trying to hold myself together. The moment I keep returning to was earlier than all of that. It's me in my kitchen, dish towel in my hand, hearing my daughter say the word easier and saying nothing back. Just standing there letting it land, the way I'd let so many things land over the years without examining what they meant. I spent a long time being the kind of man who absorbs, who smooths, who decides that keeping the peace is its own form of love, and it is sometimes. But there's a version of that which isn't love at all. It's just avoidance dressed up as patience. I confused the two for longer than I should have. What happened with my daughter wasn't an accident, and it wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was the logical end of a long pattern where I had made it easy to be overlooked. Every time I swallowed a question, every time I stepped back to avoid conflict, I was teaching everyone around me that my presence was negotiable, that my access to my wife's care, to my family's decisions, to the table, could be adjusted based on what was convenient for someone else. I didn't intend to teach that, but intentions don't override what we actually demonstrate. When I called the bank that morning, when I sat down with my attorney, when I sent those 3 letters, that wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I know how it can look from the outside. It was the first time in years I had acted on what I actually knew to be true rather than what I hoped would resolve itself. That's the difference between wisdom and wishful thinking, and I'd been on the wrong side of that line for too long. My daughter is not a villain. She is a person who found a path of least resistance and followed it until something stopped her. The stopping mattered. The accountability mattered, but so did what I understood about myself afterward, that I had contributed to the conditions that made her think she could. That takes honesty to admit, real honesty, not the performed kind. What I know now, at 67, having sat across from my wife in that facility room while she asked me to fix her blanket the way only I do it, is that character isn't what you claim about yourself. It's what you do when the stakes are real, and the easier thing would be to stay quiet. Integrity isn't a feeling, it's a series of actions, documented, consistent, unglamorous. And the courage to take those actions isn't something you're born with or without. It's something you choose, repeatedly, sometimes late, sometimes when you're tired, sometimes when you'd rather not. My wife used to say that kindness without limits isn't kindness, it's an invitation. She was talking about the geese and the bread. She was right about more than she knew. I still bring her water in the blue cup. I still tuck in the left side of the blanket first. I show up on Thursdays and Sundays. I am present and accounted for in writing and in person. That's all any of us can really offer, that we showed up, that we paid attention, and that we didn't disappear quietly when someone decided it would be convenient if we did.